Welcome to the Michigan Realty Business Podcast, where we discuss everyday business concepts with Michigan's local entrepreneurs and business owners. I'm Jeff Rutledge. I'm a licensed realtor here in the state of Michigan with Signature Sotheby's in downtown Birmingham, Michigan. I'm also the founder of MichiganRealty.org. Today, my guest is Brian Thomas, the CEO of Paul Davis Restoration and the former GM of Global Brand Marketing at Harley Davidson, a global brand director at Chevrolet, a director of brand marketing at Nissan, and a former executive GM of brand experience at Volkswagen. So from a branding standpoint, you've got an incredible episode ahead of you. Now, whether you are an independent business owner or a large business, understanding the importance of a good brand is one of the most important things that you can do for longevity. Yet, it's also the most overlooked and underappreciated by smaller businesses. A good brand becomes a part of somebody's personality. It is a statement about who they are. And today, Brian and I explore the surface of a brand's dynamic. Before we begin, I would like to emphasize that this conversation is separate from my practice as a realtor here in the state of Michigan. It is, however, part of my desire to uplift Michigan and business owners that make up our community and the places that we call home. Without any more delay, please let me introduce Brian Thomas. Brian, thanks for being here today. I'm just going to jump right into it.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. What is a brand? We're going to go for the fences on the first question. What is a brand?
I've heard it described in so many different ways that are all very applicable. Some would say it's a promise. Some would say it's a value system. Some would say it's a set of beliefs. Maybe your identity. The best brands in the world are those that actually become a part of your DNA of who you are as a person, or somehow adhere to your DNA because of the inner composition of the individual. But when done right, branding is among the most powerful and most alluring aspects of consumer culture. It might be one of the most powerful in human culture when you think about really how emotionally vested people can become in some of the biggest brands in culture. You and I think, had a conversation last time we spoke about how one of my mentors, when I first started, told me to imagine myself as a Martian, and I landed on a Sunday from outer space, and I wandered into this building that had a big, steeple on it, and it had this ornate glass in it, and I went in and just looking around, taking it all in. People are all sitting in a uniform and chanting in a uniform fashion, or perhaps reciting the same things over and over again, standing up, sitting down in a choreographed way. And then in the end, they all get in line. And at the end of that line is a small piece of bread and a sip of wine. And you then walk outside after having witnessed all this as an alien, and you go a few doors down and you see Panera Bread. And inside Panera Bread, people are lining up to get bread. But in this case, there's oregano and olive oil on it. There's high-end drinks that are made custom for you, and people are paying $5-6 a copy for this bread. And you run back down to the building with the steeple, and you find the guy with the collar, and you say, "Hey, I see you're serving this small piece of stale bread in here and small sip of what appears to be less expensive wine. If you go a few doors down, they're putting oregano and olive oil on it. People are lining up and paying money for it. Why don't you do that instead?" And the man in the collar says, "Because people won't die for that. They'll die for this small piece of stale bread." And that's brand, right? That's the most powerful story maybe in human history, or one of the most powerful. Yeah. But the same idea applies here. People have a set of values that they cherish deeply, and those values being adhered to a brand, an experience, a product, a service, whatever you want to call it. The strength of that is what determines the strength of your brand. And I've been fortunate in my career to work on behalf of some of the more powerful brands in consumer culture, and I've experienced it firsthand. It's powerful stuff, and it's the most valuable asset any company owns, and very few, in my experience, truly appreciate and embrace that idea.
So what do they do if they don't appreciate it? How do they try to circumvent it in the business world? If you don't build a brand, what are they doing?
Well, they many, in my experience, claim they're building a brand, and they believe in some cases they're building a brand, but they create the intellectual alibi for focusing your resources elsewhere. Of course, we need to hit our sales targets this month, and of course, we need to keep costs down, and of course, we need to make sure that we're not offending anyone. And so they begin to make decisions that may be contrary to building the strength of your brand, and they justify them rationally by saying they're decisions made out of business necessity. When in reality, if you're strengthening your brand the proper way, the business follows. Brand is upstream from business success. And if you embrace that and you understand it, you will reap the rewards. It takes a leap of faith and courage that in a corporate environment it's not encouraged for people to have that level of faith and courage. And I personally experienced it myself. You actually have to go against the grain inside most corporate cultures today to be a brand champion. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to put it into application.
Totally. Now, I'm a very visual person, and I assume maybe you are as well, because you're a great marketer, a brander. So there's a certain element of visualization that's probably in your strength. For those who aren't, maybe the best way to explain everything that you've just said is that it's like an individual putting on clothes. An individual can put on any type of, pants or skirt or whatever it is that they want to put on, right? There's an infinite array of designs and interpretations of style for an individual who's wearing clothes. And the same can be said about a brand. But I'm sure deeper than that, the person who's wearing a particular article of clothing also has a particular persona. And there's a deeper layer that isn't seen on the surface, but it's felt in the interaction. And does that break it down pretty good, or am I missing something there?
No, I think it does. I think not necessarily brand per se, and I may have shared this with you last time, we used to do in my automotive past research among potential minivan prospects. And minivans at the time, and in some ways today, some would say they are imbued with a stigma. The archetype of a minivan is something that's very, very unique and different, and has been in automotive culture. So it sends, like you said, an automotive product, like vehicle, like you were describing clothes, it's like clothing. It's a force multiplier for your persona to the world. So if I'm driving a Jeep, I'm one person in the world. If I'm driving a Lamborghini, I'm another. If I'm driving a Ford F-150 or a minivan, I'm another. And one of the exercises we used to put, particularly women who are entering, childbearing stages of their lives, was to offer them a free vehicle, hypothetically, for the rest of their lives. We won't. There will be no monthly payment. There will be no cost to you for insurance or maintenance or fuel or insurance. We will cover everything. If you get in an accident, we'll repair it or we'll replace it at no cost to you for the rest of your life. The only condition is that it must be a minivan. And you'd watch the recoils and the body language among the women, and none of them, a few, but very, very few would sign up for that program. And a lot of that has to do with what a minivan signals to the world. A minivan's, like I said, a very unique automotive experience for some very specific reasons. Archetypally speaking, it's really a nurturing space. It's about the inside, not the out. It kind of says to the world, particularly if you're a guy, that I am no longer capable or able to reproduce my genes. This is it. I already did it. We're done. Women, it's similar. So anyway, my point is, I agree with you completely. A suit of clothes, a vehicle, a brand are something you wrap yourself in, and it projects who you are to the world. Do you wear Beats headphones, or do you just wear generic headphones?
Right.
Do you wear Jordans, or are you content with just a pair of Asics or whatever? These things all signal to the world who you want the world to believe you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand more fully about what that means. It's sort of like your self-identification is represented in the things that you buy. And, a brand then signifies an element of that individual's personality. And it's a piece of them. And so whatever that brand tells the world, that's like the beacon to allow the world to know, hey, if you're like this is
Absolutely.
an obvious relationship here.
Absolutely.
What's interesting, though, and you mentioned your automotive past, I have to imagine that with the various different lines of vehicles, each vehicle has a different brand and persona in the way that it interacts with the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, even within interbrand decisions, there's some brands are supermarket brands, automotive brands. You can get anything from a pickup truck all the way down to a small, passenger car or SUV, and everything in between. Some brands are far more focused. The Jeep brand is very, very focused and has been for many, many years, decades. Lamborghini's another, right? But a lot of big market brands like Toyota, for example, in my opinion, is less defined at the master brand level than it is at the individual vehicle level.
That's true.
So it's kind of an interesting, I've worked for many of them. General Motors is interesting because inside the company, they talk quite a bit about General Motors and the power of it and the cultural significance. And it has been a fixture of culture for many years, but they don't produce a single vehicle with a General Motors badge on it.
I know.
Ford's a little different in that regard. Stellantis as well. So, it's just automotive I like to use as an example because it's really, in my opinion, one of the sectors in our culture that is most driven by brand, but is least inclined to appreciate and apply the sort of the heuristics around brand management and development.
So just to get some clarity, because you mentioned something that intrigued me earlier in your statement there, which is that Jeep is more focused than most automotive companies. Lamborghini is more focused than most automotive companies. And then you provided an example of Toyota not being as focused in the sense that they just have a lot of other brands that they're, working with. And so you don't see them public, as much, maybe unless we're talking about around a racetrack or something, right?
Right.
But you're saying that, well, Jeep has this brand that's outdoors, it's rugged, and it's pretty consistent along all of the classes of vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
Lamborghini, obviously sports car all day long, every single car, sporty. Okay. Mm-hmm. And of course that's not saying, of course, it's premium. It's these other, attributing elements to what makes its brand. Yeah. But Toyota has a very generic, almost very, very much like the GM example that you provided, where there's so many different brand identities that it becomes just a home or a safe, almost like a safe haven for all of these different identities to exist and to experiment through. But it becomes much more of the corporate end, the B2B end of everything going on. Is that more reasonable to am I understanding what you're saying there?
No, I think you are. You asked at the beginning, what is a brand? And one of the other things that brand is story. Okay. And stories are the most powerful and effective ways for human beings to communicate history and feelings and emotions and just what they're intending the recipient to receive. And so you can give people laundry lists and checklists of things. You can try to appeal to the rational part of their mind. But human beings aren't wired that way. Human beings are, quite frankly, we do what we want emotionally because it makes us feel good, and then we justify it rationally after the fact. I use the term intellectual alibi. And automotive's very good and famous for giving you those talking points. Well, I got this fuel economy level. Did you know it has this crash rating? It's got this amount of cargo space. It's got this horsepower output or whatever. But I bought it because I wanted to buy it because it was the right fit for me at the time. Some brands have richer, more vivid, focused, and powerful stories than others. I told you one about going into the building with the steeple. Jeep saved the world.
Yeah.
Jeep was the American hero. And you go around the world, and it's a very common experience. Many young people for many years who became older people through the 20th century had experiences with Jeeps, and oftentimes with the soldiers that came with them. And so Jeep's got a very, very rich founding and a lot of facets to that. That's one example. You talked about sports cars. Bugatti. I worked for Volkswagen, and Bugatti is one of the brands under the umbrella. And the Bugatti family and the story there, and founder, and the way past. All these things are rich stories that imbue the brand with intensity and in its values. So, Harley Davidson. I had the privilege to work at Harley Davidson for a while, and I mentioned to you during our last conversation, it's one of the few brands in the world that people are line up to tattoo on their body. Yeah. And that's just not common. No. It's because of the story and what it means to people. I had people walk up to me in airports because I had a Harley t-shirt on, and when they learned I worked for the company, they started crying and told me their story about how their father used to take them when they were young, and they got to ride in the back and learned how to ride. It was some of the best time I ever spent with my father. The story beneath the brand is something that is foundational. And a lot of brands, a lot of companies, GM, Toyota, others I could name, haven't spent as much time telling that aspect of the master brand story. They've focused more on the individual sub brands or vehicle lines, and affordability and accessibility and these things, which are practical and they sell in volume, but they're not as powerful, and they will never command the premium that a more storied brand will.
Yeah. Well, Harley Davidson is a very Americana brand. It's how old is the company now?
1903.
100, well over 100 years.
Yeah, well over 100 years, and they are effectively still about the same thing they've always been about. It's easy to get lost, but when you have a powerful foundation like that, you can find your way back home. You can see the lighthouse in the fog. Yeah. And Harley's very good about keeping that as part of their culture. The challenge with a brand like that is there's a tension in my experience between protecting the brand, which you must do, right? The brand can't stray too far from center, or else you do damage to the brand and you push people away. But you also can't become so conservative and defensive that you forget about the powerful weapon at your disposal. Mm-hmm. And I think Harley, in my experience, had to remind themselves of that, because the culture was built around protecting the core. And as the core, as the horde breached the walls, their cultural impetus or their reflexes were to bring the walls in closer. And you keep doing that and doing that and doing that. And over time, you realize, boy, we're really running out of space to protect this thing. And we've got this powerful weapon that we haven't really examined how to utilize in modern culture for growth. Interesting. And that is what they're figuring out now. I think their leadership now is fully on board with that and understands it. They're embracing electric, for example, but in a very Harley Davidson way.
That's interesting.
And at times that brand was so powerful, particularly in the 80s, 90s, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Terminator, even in the 60s, Easy Rider. It's badass. It was masculine. It was all these things. But if you go back to 1903 and you read the written accounts that people who first experienced a Harley Davidson motorbike had, and they wrote down the way it made them feel and what the experience was like, they literally got off a horse and got onto one of these things. And it was just liberation of the human spirit. It was in you. You saw it. Yeah. And that's pure and real. And so that's the core. It's free will. It's really the core of Harley, not Arnold Schwarzenegger and all that stuff is those are facets, but the atomic core is free will.
I see that now. I see that. Yeah.
They're Scottish heritage. The founders immigrated from over there and very defiant of authority and counterculture, and I could go on and on about Harley. Their story is really cool.
No, I'm fascinated that you were able to boil down, because one of my next questions was going to be, well, doesn't every brand have certain archetype ideas and themes that surround its brand identity? And you mentioned one that I was going to provide as an example, being, badass, and then you said masculine. I thought those two fit great. Obviously when you alluded to moving into electric vehicles or the electric motorcycle, I instantly think, oh, it's going to be quiet. That's like the antithesis of what Harley Davidson's about. It has a distinct sound to it. And so, when you boil it down then to free will, that's actually its brand identity. I see that, because within free will is freedom and adventure, and with that you can extrapolate out to get to badass, you can get to masculine from that starting point. So that's very fascinating.
It's interesting because we would talk to your point, Jeff. We would, we did a lot of research globally around and young people. Young people, not only were they not signing up to be Harley riders in any way to the degree they had been for generations prior, but they weren't riding, period. Fitting riding into your life was tough. And younger people, generally speaking, in the zeitgeist, these things to them, for us, they became like technological marvels. For a lot of people, they became boat anchors to my life. I'm tethered to this thing. I'm not living a real life. I'm living a virtual life. I'm not fully self-actualizing. I don't have the opportunities in the economy that maybe prior generations had. And we got this general zeitgeist angst. And when you describe what riding feels like viscerally and emotionally to these people, and you transmit it on that frequency to them, they become the version of themselves they always believed they could be, but didn't know how to become. And when you get off a Harley, you're reborn every time. You're somebody new. You're the best version of yourself. And when you tell that story, now they listen. Now they want to talk to you about riding. And that's just Harley's story. Jeep's is different. And that's the other thing. We talk about story, and when I talked about how powerful a weapon it is, and sometimes it takes time to tell a story, but it's worth it in my experience. And a story, if I, people think it's, why did I love brand? Why do I love strategy and marketing? You have to unpack how the human mind works in order to truly influence. I don't look at it like manipulation. Some do cynically. Yeah. I look at it like if you are transmitting on the right frequency and in the right way, genuinely, authentically, people will respond. And a story is actually the most powerful sales pitch. A lot of salespeople will have their talking points, and they'll have their line items and their USPs and all these things. And as soon as somebody calls you and tries to sell you something, if you walk into a store, can I help you? And you immediately, emotionally, cognitively, the wall goes up, the moat goes up
totally,
around the castle.
100%. Yep.
However, if somebody tells you a story and it's engaging, and they've now they're wrapped and they're listening intently and they're hanging on every word. You've given them a gift. You haven't, from their perspective, you've now crossed the moat and you're inside Castle Rock here, and it's almost like a Trojan horse for selling a brand. It gets you inside the gates.
But to be clear, we're not talking, when you say story, we're not talking, hi, my name's Jeff. I'm a real estate agent here in Michigan. I sell X amount of homes every month, and I can help you too. These are the ways. So.
Correct. No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, everything we do has to, I guess, at every level has to align with the overall story of the brand. But by the story of the brand, I mean, how did we get here?
Right.
And why do we do what we do?
Talk about Jeff, talk about the grit, talk about the struggle. And then that's who you are. Right.
Correct. Correct. And it's funny you mentioned grit, because that's a word that Harley wanted to reintroduce into culture. Yeah. It's the idea of delayed gratification and actually having to work through the challenges of life, because you come out better.
It's a good thing.
It's a very good thing.
Yeah.
It's a lost conversation with young people. Yeah.
Totally.
In an era when you can have whatever you want to eat delivered to your doorstep, when you can have anything you want delivered from Amazon, you don't have to leave your house to go grocery shopping. When I was a kid, I used to, when I was 7 years old, I had to wait a week to watch cartoons during a short window on Saturday morning, and that was it. And now my kids just pick up whatever screen they have available to them, and it's on demand. So the idea of delayed gratification is gone in relative to what we used to think of it like. And grit, when something's hard, that's when you've got to bear down and push your way through. And that's also a Harley value for sure.
Well, not everybody gets this opportunity, but you were mentioning to me that you had the privilege of working on multiple Super Bowl commercials.
Correct. Yeah.
And, if you're a marketer, if you're a producer or a director, or really any creative, you dream of being able to be a part of that Super Bowl commercial experience, especially if you have an advertising background. And so what were some of the lessons that you learned in doing your first one that, you learned so much from this that it helped in every aspect of how you build that brand thereafter?
That's an interesting way to put the question. I learned so much.
I can imagine. I imagine.
Well, it was a privilege. I mean, there were many things that we had the opportunity to learn. The first of which is, if you're going to go into the Super Bowl environment, first and foremost, you have to entertain. You can't go in there trying to sell 40 million people a car or a bike or insurance or anything else. So it's a different environment into which you're stepping. And so you have to appreciate that. I also learned that you're in the modern era. In fact, when we first, there was a particular campaign that was probably by most objective standards was the most successful campaign I certainly ever worked on, and one of those that was acknowledged in automotive culture, and it was the launch of the Passat in 2011, which ran in Super Bowl in 2012, and it featured a little boy dressed like Darth Vader, and we worked with Lucas Films on the whole thing. Very powerful, and didn't really talk a whole lot about feature sets and about specifics. It was, but every single, not just automotive advertiser, but advertiser in the Super Bowl from then to forth believed that the approach was, and this was the heuristic, you tooled up for a Sunday broadcast and you held your powder dry until Sunday. No one knew, no one saw, it was a secret. And we, half out of necessity and half out of just trying to, stand up like a cobra and present ourselves to be bigger than we actually were at Volkswagen at the time. We said, look, we're spending millions and millions of dollars on content and media here. Super Bowl has developed a 2-week culture around it. So for the week into it, Good Morning America, Today's Show, we'll have people on and they'll start talking about speculating. Well, what's so-and-so going to do? Here's what they did last year. And they have fun with it. There's all kinds of earned media opportunity. And this was over 10 years ago now that needed to be harnessed if we were going to justify this spend.
That's true.
So we said, look, forget this keeping your powder dry till game time thing. We're going to release our content like Tuesday evening, Wednesday overnight, and just let the world absorb it and talk about it. And then we're going to have some ancillary content in digital and other places to supplement and augment. So by the time, and by the way, selling that into leadership was really tough.
I bet.
They said, no. What do you want to do? This where you're going to spoil the surprise. I said, no, we're going to monetize our investment here. So we released it overnight, and on Wednesday morning by noon, we had over 1 million YouTube views. This was over 10 years ago. And then we had like 16 or 17 million by Sunday at game time, at kickoff. And when we were all said and done, we had 40, 50 million views on YouTube, which at the time was unprecedented. And we actually had a third party conduct an earned media analysis for us. And while we spent, $10, $11 million all in, we got 130 plus million in earned media value around that campaign. And I will tell you, my boss and I, he's out there, he'll still tell you the story, who's now the CMO of the National Football League, by the way. Okay. He and I both were told, you guys are getting fired before the campaign launched, because they're like, listen, you're advertising a car that we don't have any, they're not available in volume yet. You're really not telling any story of the vehicles, but you're not providing any specifications. You're not providing pricing. You're not, and it was like, you guys are all, so we were persona non grata until Monday morning. And then it's funny. It's the old saying about how success has many fathers, but failure's an orphan, So by Monday, nobody had been a denier. Everybody was always on board. They were excited. We had dealers sending us creative with guys dressed in robes with lightsabers slashing deals and all kinds of crazy stuff.
That's awesome.
And I mean, our traffic and our retail went up as a direct result of that campaign. Yeah. We could prove it. So so I learned one of the things I learned was courage. It is scary. And my father used to say this when I was a kid, and I had no idea what he meant. And this applies to all aspects of life, including working and branding. Was, son, sometimes the hardest thing in the world to be is right. Mm. And if you don't believe it, why the hell would anybody else?
That's true.
And in a corporate environment where there's a lot at stake, that can be these are the times that try men's souls, right, in the corporate environment. And my boss and I said, no, we're damn the torpedoes. We're going to do this. And I'm glad we did.
I don't know exactly where I've heard this, but a good salesperson takes the leads that a marketer provides and they close every single one of them. 99% of them, maybe, right? They should. That's a good salesperson. A good marketer just needs one home run.
Yeah. It is true. It's almost unfair in some ways, but there are a lot of marketers out there who haven't. I've been lucky. Some of it is just great brands provide great opportunity and rich, fertile territory for creative development. I've had the privilege to work with some of the best advertising agencies and people on the planet. I really have been lucky that we're there. I mean, great shops, Crispin Porter, Deutsch LA, Droga 5, great shops. And when you get agencies like that in a room, and there's big money that comes in those relationships between big companies and those agencies, there's a certain amount of trepidation and, tender walking, because it's like, well, how much are they going to let us explore here, really? In the end, we've got this great relationship, but are they really going to let us? And the thing about the best work we've done, and that campaign was one example, is that, we did. Now, we were collaborators. We were fully involved in we were vested and our names were tied to it, just like the agency. But if you truly embrace the idea of we're going to weaponize this brand, the sky's the limit. Really is.
So what do you think about color psychology in brand development? Something that I've been debating recently with some close associates of mine is the idea that color matters. I'm not sure if I'm convinced on this, because I think that there are many ways to apply color that can create the opposite emotion effect that what you would traditionally think of as red is like aggressive, but you can use it in a way that's like very subtle, and it actually emphasizes whatever emotion you're trying to emphasize. So do you give any credence to this idea of color psychology in the way that we build brands? Is it just hype that you read about?
One thing I did learn, because I had the opportunity to work with marketers all around the world in different parts of, in Asia and in South America and in Eastern Europe and other places. A color in one part of the world can stand for something that is entirely different than what it stands for in another part of the world. My experience, and this is just mine, Jeff, everybody's going to have theirs, is that while a color can, some brands pick colors that are just very polarizing. I own my own business now, property restoration business, and ServPro is one of the more dominant players nationally in the U.S. in this category, and they just have this exceptionally loud green neon sort of, and all their vans are all their vehicles are wrapped in that. Their brand is wrapped in that. So that bright green and bright orange, they've taken the, I'm going to light a torch and run through a crowd, sort of approach to that. And I'm sure that works for them in their way. You don't, if you see a ServPro truck, it's a ServPro truck. That I will give, but I ascribe more value to consistency. I think what marketers, creative people, one of the things we are vulnerable to is boredom. We like being fresh and new and creative, and we need to be, we must be. But there's also this mix of discipline and consistency that enables a brand to become what it needs to become. That doesn't give you license to not be creative, to not be fresh, but there's a way to do it while maintaining that level of discipline in the way you show up. So, color might be one example. I don't know. But the Chevrolet brand had a certain gold-ish sort of color to it, and among others, and it can't be purple,
right?
In another market when it's gold here. I used to, because I've done this, you get on a plane at JFK, and you walk into the Nike store, and it's got a certain aesthetic, look, feel, and then you fly to Seoul, South Korea, and you get off the plane and walk into the Nike store there, and it's the same store.
It's the same, right? It's
the same experience. It's the same feel. That's brand discipline.
Interesting.
And that's what I think is the bigger challenge. Color psychology, in my opinion, can vary by market, and you can do certain things, but what's more important is discipline and structure to sort of build a ring fence around the creativity.
So I'm going to repackage what you just said, because I think it would be helpful for the viewers. Color or topography, or how the interior design of a space are just subcategories of what should be consistently repeatable, so that it's recognized no matter where you go, no matter what you do. Although I do wonder, if you go to Seoul, North or South Korea, if you go to then New York City, obviously vastly different cultures. Sure, there are going to be some things that are similar. Maybe the colors are similar. Maybe the topography is similar. Maybe the layout of the space is similar. But are there then cultural changes that gets sprinkled in there? Is that good marketing?
Yes, I think you need to be mindful of where you're at. And typically, in my experience, that exists not necessarily as much at the master brand level as it does the layers below. When you raise your hand or you become more engaged with the brand and you start to get closer and closer to the brand, there should be an increasing level of relatability. And so and again, this is, they keep saying art and science when it comes to marketing, and I still believe that's true. There's an alchemy that happens between the overall brand and then the experience as you get closer and closer to it. And in markets like India, it might be different than in Detroit. One of the things I was tasked with doing when I was working at General Motors was reviewing creative content for the same brand from all over the world. And it can be frustrating. You're the brand police, which I really don't like. I don't like being the one that, sort of stifles creativity. I like being the one that encourages it. But there are certain, like, for example, there was a piece of print creative that came across my desk that was from a market in India. And among other things, India's a lot about color, so it's very colorful, kind of a presentation. But there was, among other symbols, a swastika. Now, swastika in the Western world has a very specific meaning, and it is not something. It produces a visceral reaction. It's almost like getting your hand close to a burner on a stove. Right? I learned that in other parts of the world, this history is not at all as intensely associated. In fact, it's in some parts of that country, it is a peaceful symbol. It is a symbol that goes back thousands of years. Yeah. And it's about balance, and it's about other things. And so if the guys with whom I was corresponding, my counterparts, were genuinely flummoxed. They didn't get it. And in this hyper digital age where content travels at light speed around the world, you have to be mindful of that, and you have to know what battles you're willing to fight and which are you willing to not. But
yeah, that's true. Now, in that particular case, did you opt to remove that symbol because it would go viral for the wrong reasons?
Correct. Yeah, there are people who will. I don't want to call them professional agitators, but there are people who live to create controversy in social media, and something like that with a company like General Motors, that would have been a lightning rod. And once we explained to them, they got it. It wasn't a hill they were willing to die on.
Right. Exactly.
But they genuinely were surprised and didn't get it until I explained it to them, showed it to them.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And, I think that from there being a lot of cultural differences, no matter where you go in the world, there's always something though that, if you, like you said, if you go to the Nike store in New York, or if you go to the Nike store in South Korea, there's always something that I think resonates with that home in some subtle fashion. And underneath it all though is that consistency. And that's so important. That's one thing that I've been focused on a lot with Michigan Realty, is to just make sure that I'm very consistent with the brand's feeling in all of the content that we make, and the way that we create a business card or a flyer, or if we're creating a video, have something, whether it's the topography, the color, the shapes. There needs to be this just like a concise understanding of who we are through the visual representation of what we do. Obviously, we're a media company, right? So most of what we're doing is hyper visual. And so we are trying to stress as much as possible on the consistency of the visuals itself. And it's not that it's difficult. It's just that sometimes that consistency puts us into a corner, right? And and oftentimes, even though we may have a great idea off in left field, we're not going to be able to experiment with that because it doesn't fit with the consistency that we're trying to create. In that regard, would you consider that a good brand is also limiting in its creativity because of that?
I wouldn't. I agree with everything you said. I wouldn't say that good brands are limiting in their creativity. Okay. They're disciplined And
Okay.
I think the best marketers in the world are also hallmarked by their history of saying no to good ideas, simply because they don't align with the story of your brand and who you are.
Interesting.
I've looked at a lot of great creative I loved that just didn't fit with the brand. And you want to, and the agency is excited. They love it. They know it's a great idea. I know it's a great idea, but in the end, the Volkswagen brand isn't about X, Y, and Z. It's about these things. And that's, it's hard to be mom and dad, sometimes you got to say no because it's just the right thing to do. And that also takes courage. Because, they're going to be disappointed. You're saying no to something that's, and then a lot of marketers are about themselves. And I don't mean to be critical, but, oh, this is going to build my profile. This is going to be my career defining thing. And then I'll move on to whatever's next. Whereas the best marketers in the world have the confidence in themselves and in the brand to say, no, I'm going to work within the framework of this world-class iconic brand. And that work alone will produce the outcome.
Yeah. And actually what might work for that world-class brand may not work for the mom and pop shop down the street.
Yeah.
So
100%.
It's always different. Okay. 100%. So I'm going to ask one last really loaded question for you, Brian. And I think a lot of people will find this to be very valuable. But if you're a marketer, maybe you're a small business owner, right? And you don't have the ability to defer responsibility to a professional marketer.
Yep.
What's one thing that they can do today to improve the marketability of that business?
Well, of course, the go-to answer is social. Become more proficient with social. And doesn't mean you're just everywhere all the time. It means you're consistent and you're taking advantage of those platforms that are very low cost and available ubiquitously. So that don't be afraid of that. Embrace that. Utilize it to the best of your ability. One of the other things that I've found trying to forge partnerships with other like-minded people like yourself is another great way of sort of getting scale,
right?
By sharing resources and building relationships with others who think the way you do. That I found to be something else that's for a new business, for a business that doesn't have a massive marketing budget, is also critical.
Totally.
And I will say too, I've had to sort of calibrate my thinking because I was on the other end of the telescope for so many years as a guy in the corporate glass house dealing with franchisees, with dealers, and now I'm the franchisee or I'm the owner of the business. So I'm having to think a little bit more. I'm having to be more scrappy. I'm having to be a little bit more thrifty and a little tricky now and then. One of the things, for example, I don't want to call it tricky. I found an intersection between several personal passion points of mine in the business. I had one of the running jokes on my own social channels for the last few years has been how many Buffalo Wild Wings points I have. I'm a Buffalo Wild Wings aficionado, right? So
okay.
I love the experience and
love it.
So it's just basic. Well, I had a ridiculous amount of points. I mean, points that just make you, six figures, and I'd never spent any of them. I don't know why. Because, you know what? The marketer in me, the brand guy in me, wouldn't let me do it unless I had an idea. I didn't want to just do it, use them to buy more wings or whatever. So I kept thinking there's got to be a way I could put this to productive use. And I met a guy one night. Of course, at B-Dubs, and he was a teacher at a local middle school in a market where kids are relatively underprivileged, and they might not have certain circumstances at home that other kids do. And I struck up a conversation with him, and he told me how every year kids at the beginning of the academic year sign up, make commitments for attendance, for academic performance, other things, and those that hit those commitments get a reward at the end of the year in the form of a big, call it a meal and a celebration in their honor. And we got to talking. He introduced me to his principal, and I took my beat-ups points and I bought more wings than you could ever count, and fries and dessert, and took it there to those kids that day. And it was a small thing, but
yeah,
I will tell you that how much social response we got from that, not just what we put out into the world, but the school system, the teachers themselves, the principal, the parents, that it just, so, I would tell people, be genuine, be real, be human.
Yeah.
That people respond in conversation to you when they can sense that you're sincere, and they will respond to you and through other channels the same way if you're sincere.
Yeah. Totally. Well, what's funny is you just touched on it a second ago, but it's the idea that now you're in the trenches, whereas before it was kind of like you're flying this Learjet.
Yeah.
Now you're in the trenches on a bicycle, and it's like, okay, I know I have to pedal. I know I have to pedal to keep this bike on two wheels without falling over now. And
right.
So now you're in the trenches. You're looking for, just a more creative way to get to that point that you're trying to go. Right. Totally. I understand it. I get exactly what you're saying there. Totally.
100%. I'm trying to use my experience to do that. And I've watched some dealers do some very innovative things on their own too, that I'm going to intend to borrow. There are some other things, like, for example, my father was a Vietnam vet. He had never had a health problem until he contracted a form of bone cancer as a direct result of his exposure to Agent Orange while he was there, and passed away several years ago. So military vet causes have always been close to my heart. That's cool. My time in the Jeep brand was a really rewarding example of that. But one of the events that I'm pulling together, my father has a bunch of medals. He has 3 Purple Hearts, keepsakes from that time period. And many other families of fallen vets or vets themselves have a lot of this stuff that's maybe fallen in a bit of disrepair or become tarnished. But one of the things we do is restore property with specialized cleaning technology and equipment here. So I'm planning, hopefully, for our next Veterans Day to have an event where we bring vets, families, and their keepsakes in here, and we clean them.
Oh, cool.
And that's an intersection of it's an intersection of what we do every day here at this business, along with my personal passion points and the community. So if you look for those intersections, you'll find that's where your ideas are. You just have to uncover them.
Totally. Yeah. Get the overlap of your following and somebody else's following together in some way, and then do something special for the community. That seems to be a cornerstone of a lot of good business marketing, especially in the small business world. It is gritty. It's you got to put in the work, but it'll pay off. Certainly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you for being on the show today, and I hope that you come on again.
Oh, Jeff, I loved it. Anytime you want, and I'd love to have you over here, show you the place. Maybe we can
totally
do the next one from here. Who knows?
Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah. And so, because I think that we've got at least 3 or 4 more episodes that we could do easily, because there are so many other rabbit holes that we can get into when it comes to branding. We just touched on some of these ideas, but I think that the things that we've talked about today, we should be able to build off of in the next episode with you through Michigan Realty here. So thank you for your time today. And you're definitely welcome back anytime.
Jeff, I love it. Anytime. Best luck to you at Michigan Realty, and hope to do